Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, bringing you another report out of the jam-packed Freedom event that took place in Victoria this past weekend called the Reclaiming Canada Conference. And this time, we're going to give you tips on if you are a parent who's struggling to become a homeschool parent due to finances.
Once you've got the teachers' colleges, you've got the teachers. And once you've got the teachers, you've got the students. And once you've got the students, you've got the next generation of professionals.
Bottom line is there's no interest in having people that are financially independent. I mean, if you have a society you live in where the goal is to have people dependent on the state, why would you have them financially free?
This is Cam Brar beside me, and we actually just got off of a panel in the conference. Yeah, and we spoke on education, but there was something that you said that I pulled you aside for because you actually threw in some advice when it came to the cost of living. Cam Brar is an entrepreneur. He has 40 years of experience in sales, some finance. And so thanks for being on Rebel News.
Oh, it's my pleasure being on Rebel News.
I'm a homeschool mom as well. And like so many others, it really was, how can we afford to do this? But there are ways to adapt, whether it be moving. But you also have some good advice for families like that when it comes to budgeting.
Absolutely.
What's that about?
Yeah, well, the first step before you do anything is to take a stock of where you are financially. It's like taking stock of yourself. So start with a budget. You know that 90% of Canadians don't have a budget. They do not have any clue as to where their money goes. I encounter people all the time I have discussions with, and I say, well, how much have you got in savings? Oh, well, I've got, like, I'll give you an example. I had some clients not too long ago I dealt with. They made $165,000 between them collectively, and they had about $8,000 in savings over 3 years and $90,000 of debt. I know, insane. So you look at that and you say, well, no wonder you're not, doing anything. And when I asked them where all their money went, they said, well, we don't have a clue. And the first thing I said was, look, let's start with this. Get a budget, but more important, pull your statements for the last 3 months, pull your online banking statements, and look at where your money goes. Force yourself to look at it. I know it's going to be hard because we're so used to this tap and go culture that we somehow think money magically just comes and goes. So this forced people, whenever I've done this exercise, it's forced people to take a hard look at it. And the sad thing, I wish everybody would do it. Even when I ask people to do that, less than half of them actually do it. But the ones that do it always come back grateful. And they're always shocked with where their money goes. I dealt with a lady not too long ago, and she was spending $2,200 a month at Starbucks.
Oh my goodness. That is nuts.
I know, absolutely insane. Now, she made a lot of money, so I know she made a lot of money, so it didn't really notice notice that much to her. But when she started putting all the numbers together, she realized the reason she had no savings is because all the money flowed out. And a lot of the expenses usually are going out. You grab a sandwich here, you grab a coffee here, those sorts of things. And when you compare that, like I've had clients that I've dealt with that are immigrants. Yeah. They come to this country from a third world country or somewhere else. And within a short span, they've managed to buy a house. Mm-hmm. And I always have people ask me, well, how did they do it? They're sacrificing. They don't go out to Tim Hortons. They don't go to all those places. They cook meals at home. They, bag a lunch. They do all of those sorts of things because their commitment, their goal, their focus, single purpose is to own a home. And they're driven by that.
So we will need you to have your medical competency if you want to be a doctor, but nowadays you will also need your diversity, inclusion, and equity competencies as well. Because we control the institution, we get to decide who gets in. This allows them to transform who can fit into their economy and who and how they will earn a living. And the only way they will do it is if they subscribe to their ideology.
So what do you make of people who say, well, you know what, everything costs way less than it does today? And that's how those people got ahead.
Well, you're right. Things were a lot cheaper, but don't forget, wages were a lot cheaper. Now, proportionally, of course, wages didn't go up at the same rate that everything else has gone up. So there's no doubt that things are very expensive and it's not so easy to do so. But if you do want to get a head start, you can look at relocating to a different province. For example, if you chose to move to Alberta, I looked at houses, and in some of those areas, you can buy a house for under $250,000. And if you want to purchase a home for under $250,000, you only need an income of $60,000 to qualify. You know, given where we're at these days, I think you could probably even work at McDonald's and get 60,000 a year with what they're paying these days. And so, you know, with only $12,500 down, your payments would be $1,340 a month. So think of how much money you could save. The reason we struggle so much is people that came prior or people in previous generations were willing to sacrifice their wants, their wants versus what they absolutely needed. So they didn't maybe need that second car or that vacation and whatever else. And I'm not saying live like a miser, but I'm saying get priorities in your life. So you should make a list of the top 3 things you want to achieve financially. Get your budget together, figure out the top 3 things you want to do, and then have a game plan of how you're going to get there. So if you, in this example, said, okay, I want to buy this house, I'm willing to move, start doing some research. Do you have the $12,500 for the down payment? You don't? Great. How many months do you want to save it over? Let's get a plan. Yeah. So the bottom line is planning for it. It's as cheesy old saying that those who fail to plan to fail. As stupid as it is, it's apropos still today. If you do that, if your kids see you having a budget, following a budget, being fiscally responsible, they're going to start imitating that. They're going to learn those valuable skills. Because let's face it, school isn't where they're going to be taught those skills. There is no interest for the government or anybody else to make your kids self-sufficient. They don't want that. We know that we live in a time and an age where dependency is what we're always taught. So if you want your kids to be truly free, and in this country, the first place it begins is with financial freedom, so they're not enslaved to anything, and that'll start with you as a parent.
We sit here and we think to ourselves that somehow if we get a teacher replaced, that it's going to suddenly change things. It's not. We've got a whole system to have to undo. It starts right from the foundation of when you've got your kids at home and starting with educating them yourselves. Because as I've mentioned, all levels of higher education, basic education, are designed with the Marxist ideology in play. It's to get your kids to think in a totally different manner.
What about kids and what they're learning? I know if you were homeschooling, you could teach them about finances, but it doesn't seem to be happening in the public school. What's your thoughts on that?
No, it absolutely isn't happening in the public school because there's no opportunities for that. Bottom line is there's no interest in having people that are financially independent. I mean, if you have a society you live in where the goal is to have people dependent on the state, why would you have them financially free? And if you can now homeschool kids, think of the wonderful opportunity, taking them grocery shopping, telling them that they've got a budget to work within and helping them purchase items. So they learn about sacrifice. They learn about not having to be able to buy everything they want and their heart's desire, but being able to balance that budget. Think of the valuable skill set that gives children at a young age. That's what you want to instill.
You would have a child today doing a math problem. So they were talking about an example where folks were going skiing. And the resort was 100 kilometers away. And they'd gone 75% of the way there. So the teacher would ask the class, how far have they gone? But instead of just doing that, the teacher would ask now, how many of you have gone skiing before? Show of hands. Some kids would put up their hands, some kids wouldn't. So the teacher would ask, how come you can't go skiing? Seems rather unfair, no? How is it that some people can and can't? Do you think that's a just society we live in? So we can work into this ideology, like that critical race theory and all of these other things. They can work in these things into the topic. So while you might be talking to a school board or a teacher who says, well, there's no set course on these things are introduced into the conversation all the time. Whether it be science, mathematics, you can bring this into every equation.
Well, there you have it. Really good advice from Cam Brar, especially if you are interested in homeschooling but feel like you can't financially afford it. Thanks for being on Rebel News.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
If you appreciate this report and all of our coverage of the Reclaiming Canada conference, please consider chipping in to cover our expenses to get here. We had to take a very expensive ferry. By we, I mean myself and Alex, who's behind the camera. We also had to get an Airbnb to stay here, and all of that is expenses that we rely and hope that you will help us cover. So if you'd like to chip in a few bucks to do so, please go to rebelfieldreports.com and chip in what you can. We appreciate your support.